today. So if you look at your schedule, starting with chapter 11. And today we will start getting into, instead of more of the basics, we'll start getting into things like vital signs and actually breaking down the steps of different ADL tasks that you'll be doing. So we'll start getting into that actual CNA care. So starting with chapter 11, we're looking at admission, transfer, and discharge of residents. As far as those things go, it really depends on the type of environment that you work in for what this looks like. If you work, for example, in a hospital, admits, transfers, and discharges happen usually daily. If you work in a long-term care setting, maybe a little less frequently than that. So it just depends on the type of facility that you're in. So know that having to leave your primary residence, wherever you're living before, and move into a facility can be kind of scary for residents. They don't know what to expect. They may be angry that they have to move into a facility. They may lose things like their health, their independence, their ability to get around. Maybe they're having some trouble ambulating. They typically don't get to bring their car, right? So maybe they're not going to be able to leave whenever they want to. Maybe they're not going to have as much contact with friends, family. Maybe they can't bring their pets. Maybe they can't bring some of the belongings that they really like from home. Also important to think about, and we talked about this a little bit yesterday, LGBTQ residents can experience additional challenges, feeling like maybe they're not going to be accepted, or maybe they won't be understood, or they won't be referred to by the proper name or pronouns. Also want you to keep in mind that even though a facility is just where we go to work, right? We go there, we work our shift, and we go home. It is where the residents live. So we need to make sure that we make the resident feel comfortable. We make sure that the residents' needs are being met, that the care that we're providing is, again, person-centered, that we're making sure to take into account their preferences, their cultural background, because, again, this is their home. So we're going to do a little activity, and hopefully this little activity is eye-opening for you, just to give you an idea of what it might be like to move into a facility for a resident. So it says your house has been sold and you need to move in with your sister and her family for 6 months, maybe more. You might even be staying there permanently, you're not really sure. You don't know exactly what's going to be occurring, so the only things that you can bring from your home need to fit in the room that you're going to be sharing with your niece. So that room is going to be split into two. You'll have a 6-foot by 12-foot space. Already present in the room for you is a bed, a chest of drawers, and a chair. They also have a privacy screen to help split the room. So anything that you don't bring with you, you can put in storage, but you're not going to be able to access any of that stuff that's in storage until you move again. So think of your 6-foot by 12-foot space. Also, you have a 5-foot by 3-foot space in your closet. I'm going to ask you to select 6 items that you want to bring that are going to fit in that space. If you're concerned about your wardrobe, 7 outfits can count as 1 item. So I'll give you a minute to think about that. I won't ask you to share. Just want you to think about or write down the things that you would bring that would fit in that space. Also keep in mind, it sounds like you're sharing the room with a child. All right. So think about the items that you wanted to bring. Think about how difficult it is to figure out 6 items that you're going to bring into your space, right? Because you probably have more than 6 things that you would like to take with you. So now that you've got your 6 items there, during the first week, your niece, who's 5, is looking at one of those things that you brought, and she accidentally drops it and it breaks. Think about how you would feel. Now, the second week that you're living there, you haven't received any of your mail, which you had forwarded to your sister's house. You mention that to your sister, and she says, "Oh, I saw some here yesterday. I don't know where it is." And then she leaves. What's your response to that? Yikes, right? Where's my mail? Probably have some important bills you need to pay or important information that might be trying to get to you. So think about the items that you decided to take with you. Think about how you felt as you were trying to pick between items. Think about if that made you frustrated, angry, upset. Also, think about how you felt when one of those most prized items that you brought was broken and dropped. And also the fact that your sister doesn't really seem concerned with the fact that they lost your mail and they don't know where it is. So, thinking about that scenario, imagine if that were a resident, right? They move into our facility, they've got their 6 most prized possessions that are going to fit in their room. We go in and we touch something and we break it. Or the resident says, "Oh, I'm expecting a letter from my friend." And you're like, "Oh yeah, I saw that the other day. I don't really know what happened to it." The resident's probably going to feel pretty upset, right? If they're waiting for and expecting that letter. So consider that the homes that we live in are really our own personal museums, right? We handpick all the things that we put in our home. All of the things in our home represent some part of us or our life. They show the things that we like, pictures of our family. It can be really difficult to part with those things that mean something to us. So it's important to understand why residents have rights and also what those rights are, how important it is for them to be able to bring their prized possessions and also for us to treat them with respect. Also important to understand that they still have the right to privacy and communication. They should be able to send mail, receive mail, call friends and family, and also receive those calls in a facility. Yeah, Irene?
Are they allowed to bring cell phones?
Yeah, most facilities will allow that. Yeah, we had few people in Jerry Psych that had cell phones. Um, Usually, as they progressed with dementia, they couldn't figure out how to use the cell phone, and then the family would just take it. Or as they progressed with dementia, they would just call their son or daughter all day, every day, and then they would take the phone. So they're like, "Oh my gosh, I have work to do, and mom's calling me 11 times a day." It's like, yeah, sorry. So depends on the type of resident, but usually facilities will allow them. It's just, can the resident figure out how to use the thing? And also, does the resident want the thing? All right. So hopefully that activity was eye-opening, made you kind of think about what it would be like to have to move into a facility. Not that I would expect you to, move into a facility anytime soon, but you're working in one, it's the resident's home. We need to make sure that we understand, even though it's just our workplace, it is essentially their home. So our homes are important to us. We need to be respectful. All right. Any questions about that before we move on to admission? Okay. So when a resident is admitted to a facility, what that means is that they're moving in. So when they are moving into our facility, they're typically brand new to us. We usually don't know anything about them. They come in with, doctor's orders and maybe some past history from family, or if they're coming from like the hospital or a different facility, we may be able to get some information from them there. But it's really important that we do our own admission assessment, our own intake of this resident. we want to be able to know, how they transfer and what they eat, what their diet is, how they shower, if they are fall risk, if they need assistance brushing their teeth, combing their hair, tying their shoes. So we collect a lot of information upon admission that helps us to then better care for that resident. One term I want you to be familiar with is baseline. So when a resident comes into a facility, all the information that we are gathering is baseline information. We gather things like vital signs. So we get that initial set of vital signs, and we can compare those vital signs, height, weight, blood pressure, temperature, etc., to any future measurements. So we have some idea of what their blood pressure is, what their height is, what their weight is, and then, a week later when we check it, we can compare those values to those initial baseline readings. So we need something to get an idea of how they're doing, something to compare future measurements to. It is not uncommon in a facility for a resident to be admitted and to start losing weight. That usually goes along with the fear, uncertainty, being uncomfortable, kind of feeling uneasy. A lot of times they're not eating like they were at home. They can start to lose weight. So if we get that initial weight and a week later they've lost 2 pounds, yikes, right? We need to increase their nutritional intake. So those baseline values are extremely important. As far as nursing assistant goes, things that you would be in charge of or responsible for upon admission of a resident, usually the family will bring belongings before the resident actually moves in. So you might assist in setting up the room, making the bed, making sure it's nice and clean and tidy, looks welcoming. When the resident comes in, you will want to note the time that they get there, also their condition. You want to make sure you introduce yourself, tell them who you are, what you're there to do. Also, make sure you always address them by their formal name unless they ask you to call them something else. So you could say Mrs. Smith or Mr. Smith. If they say, oh, you can just call me Bob. Okay, fine, then call them Bob. But we always want to address them by their formal name until they tell us otherwise. Take time to help the resident with the admission process. Imagine if you moved into a new facility and someone was like, hi, I'm Jessica, I'm the nursing assistant. Here's your stuff, here's your room. Over there is where we eat. Let me know if you have any questions. And then they left. I'd be like, what just happened? Where do I eat? When do I eat? Who are these people? Who are you? What do you do? Right? You'd have a lot of questions. So make sure that you take time during that admission to really make sure that the resident feels welcome. Things you can do to help with that: show them around the facility, give them a tour, introduce them to other residents, make sure that you're helping them get their stuff set up, show them, here's your shower, here's your toilet, here's your sink, your closet. Make sure that if you notice anything that maybe was not mentioned to you when you were given the information on the resident's admission, that you report that to the nurse. So if you notice the resident maybe isn't very steady on their feet and they're ambulating without any assistive device, or maybe they're kind of confused and that wasn't reported to you. Typically, your facility will have an admission checklist. So you'll go down that checklist, make sure that you have done everything on that checklist, and then it usually gets submitted to the nurse. Yeah, Irene?
The CNAs meet with the resident before the nurse or after?
So typically what happens with an admission is the resident meets the nursing director, resident and their family usually, like they come in and they do kind of like an interview, kind of like getting hired at the facility, but moving into the facility and interview. So the nursing director usually has met the resident and has done kind of an intake on them, like, do they have a little dementia? Are they steady on their feet? How are they showering in their current environment? What sorts of foods are they eating? Do they have a special diet? So they usually get all of that information. Usually when a resident comes into a new facility, the nurse and nursing assistant are both going to greet them. And the nurse may have you start that admission checklist and then come in and, introduce themselves, go through medications with the resident. So it's usually everyone's meeting them, and then you're doing all of this intake stuff like showing them around, introducing them to other people, maybe getting their height and weight and some vital signs, and then the nurse is coming in and taking over that process. So it's a team effort. When I worked in Jerry Psych, I used to go out and meet the residents. Sometimes we would go to the hospital and meet them, or another facility that they were in, or their home. And that really just gives the nursing director like some insight into, I don't like to put this way, but what we're getting into by this resident moving into our facility, right? A lot of times you can tell, is this going to be a safe place for the resident or not? We had a resident who was released from a 72-hour hold at the hospital, and no other facility would take the resident. And we went and met with the resident, and we were like, okay, well, we have a locked facility. We'll give this a try. If this resident is threatening to our staff, it's not going to work. And we got the resident there. And the resident actually went out into the courtyard and climbed the fence to leave the facility. So we called 911. They came and picked him up, and we never saw him again. So you can usually get a lot of information that way. And then, of course, when they move in, there might be some things that maybe we didn't notice when we met them at first, some things that we would need to maybe adjust in the care plan based on what we had initially thought. Good question. So yeah, there's a lot that goes into that before they actually come into the facility. So looking at measuring weight, we're going to watch a video for this. So I will skip through this. I will mention to you that there are a lot of different types of scales. A manual scale, which is what you're looking at here on this screen, is kind of obsolete in this day and age. We don't really use these a lot anymore. You do need to know how to use them, but typically the scales that we use for residents are digital, so the resident steps on and it tells us their weight. You will want to know how to use these. Like I said, it's pretty simple. So the bottom numbers there are in 50-pound increments. So you can see 50, 100, 150, 200, etc. The little black square actually moves across that dial. So you would ask the resident, about how much do you think you weigh? And if they said, oh, I weigh about 160 pounds, you'd move that to 150. And then the dial across the top, you would start to move, that is in increments of a pound. So you would start to move that until that little balance bar there is balancing between the two edges. So they're pretty easy to use. Like I said, kind of obsolete in this day and age. Most of these scales, resident just steps on and it tells us a number. So we will watch a video on how to do that. Yeah, Samantha?
Really quick, for like our readings, should we be really memorizing like the step by step from like step 1 to like 11 for this for like testing and stuff, or is it just kind of knowing the basics of it, or will we learn it in work?
For now, I would not memorize those steps. In clinical, you will be going through like introduction, those intro steps for every skill, and then every step of every skill, and you'll be doing those in order. So you'll get to nail that down more in clinical, and then you'll be comfortable with those steps in order to take your exam.
Awesome.
So
Okay,
right now you don't need to be like, okay, step 1, I'm going to go in, I'm going to introduce myself. Step 2, you don't need to do that yet. Right now we're working on those foundations, right? That base knowledge, so then you can start to build on and understand those different skills. Yes, great questions. All right, so recording weight is the one we're going to watch. It's skill video number 14. One thing I want to point out to you now that you have been in class for a few days and hopefully kind of starting to get in the rhythm of things is that when you look at these videos, if you want to go back and watch them at a later time, or if you watch them when you're in clinical again, each video will tell you where the skill can be found in your CNA Skills Handbook. So that handbook, so for example, skill 14 is found on page 30. So that handbook is up at the top in your resources tab. It says CNA Skills Handbook. If you click on the link, it will take you to a digital version of your handbook. And the page numbers on the left and the page numbers on the right don't match, so keep that in mind. You're looking for page 30. There we go. Page 30 of the skills handbook. So that tells you for skill 14, here are those step-by-step things that you need to do to check the weight. So if you're watching those videos, you can be looking at that skills handbook as well. Like I said, that'll come more into play with clinical, but just to give you a heads up. All right, so we will watch how to take a weight. If I can find it again. There we go.
Hi, Ms. Bragg. My name is Betsy. I'm your nursing assistant.